At dawn, on June 22nd, 1941, the Earth itself seemed to come alive. Along a border stretching more than 1,800 miles, artillery thundered without warning. Searchlights cut through the darkness. And in a single, coordinated moment, the largest invasion force in human history surged eastward. More than 3 million German soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union. They came with tanks, aircraft, and absolute confidence. Most believed the war would be over in weeks. Some thought it would end in days. Adolf Hitler was certain of one thing. The Soviet Union was a rotten structure, and if kicked hard enough, it would collapse. But what began that morning was not a campaign. It was not even a conventional war. It was a gamble so vast, so reckless, that its failure would decide the fate of Nazi Germany itself. Within 6 months, the German army would be frozen, exhausted, and bleeding. Within 2 years, it would be fighting for survival. And within 4, Berlin would lie in ruins. This was Operation Barbarossa, the invasion that doomed Nazi Germany. By the summer of 1941, Nazi Germany stood at the height of its power. Poland had been crushed in weeks. France had fallen in just 42 days. The Low Countries were occupied. Norway and Denmark secured Germany's northern flank. Across the English Channel, Britain still fought on, but alone, battered, and under siege. To much of the world, Germany appeared unstoppable. Yet behind this image of dominance lay a dangerous truth. Germany was running out of options. Britain refused to surrender. A naval invasion was impossible. And the war Hitler had expected to end quickly was dragging on. For Hitler, there was only one solution: the East. The pact that was never meant to last. In August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union had stunned the world by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Two sworn enemies, Nazism and communism, agreed not to fight each other. Publicly, it was a non-aggression pact. Secretly, it divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland was carved apart. The Baltic states fell under Soviet control. Germany secured raw materials critical for its war effort. But from the very beginning, this pact was built on lies. Hitler never intended to coexist with the Soviet Union. To him, it was a temporary convenience, nothing more. In Hitler's worldview, Bolshevism was not just an enemy ideology. It was, in his mind, a racial threat. The war in the East would not be fought like the war in the West. It would be a war of annihilation. Ideology, oil, and obsession. Hitler's reasons for invading the Soviet Union were deeply intertwined. First, ideology. He believed Germany's future depended on destroying communism and securing Lebensraum living space in the East. Second, resources. Germany lacked oil, grain, and raw materials. Ukraine's farmland and the Caucasus oil fields promised independence from foreign supply. And third, arrogance. Germany's victories had convinced Hitler that the Red Army was incompetent and weak. Stalin's purges in the late 1932 had eliminated thousands of experienced Soviet officers. Entire command structures had been gutted. To Hitler and his generals, the conclusion seemed obvious. The Soviet Union would collapse, just like Poland and France. Warnings ignored. Not everyone shared Hitler's confidence. Some German generals quietly warned that the Soviet Union was vast beyond comprehension. Its roads were poor, its railways incompatible, its winters unforgiving. Others pointed out a more dangerous problem. Germany had no clear plan for a long war in the East, but Hitler dismissed all doubts. He believed the campaign would be decided before winter. Logistics, supply, and long-term occupation were afterthoughts. As one German officer later admitted, "We were preparing for a sprint, not a marathon." Stalin's fatal miscalculation. On the Soviet side, the situation was no less dangerous. Despite repeated intelligence warnings, Joseph Stalin refused to believe Germany would attack. British intelligence warned him. Soviet spies warned him. Even German deserters crossed the border with detailed invasion plans. Stalin ignored them all. He believed Hitler would not risk a two-front war while Britain still resisted. As a result, the Red Army remained unprepared. Aircraft were lined up wing to wing on airfields. Troops were stationed close to the border. Defensive plans were incomplete. The Soviet Union stood on the edge of disaster, unaware that the countdown had already begun. The calm before the storm. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, German soldiers took their positions. Engines idled. Weapons were loaded. Orders were opened. Across the border, Soviet troops slept. When the first shells fell, there would be no declaration of war, no warning, no retreat, only destruction. And once the invasion began, there would be no turning. 3 armies, 1 gamble. Operation Barbarossa was not a single attack. It was 3 massive invasions launched at once. The German army was divided into 3 army groups, each with a different objective. Army Group North advanced through the Baltic states, aiming for Leningrad. Army Group Center, the strongest formation, drove straight toward Moscow. Army Group South pushed into Ukraine, seeking farmland, industry, and oil. Altogether, Germany committed more than 3 million men, supported by over 3,500 tanks and nearly 2,700 aircraft. Never before had so much military power been unleashed in a single operation. At the head of this force stood men shaped by years of victory, generals like Heinz Guderian, pioneer of armored warfare, and Franz Halder, the army's chief planner. They believed in speed, shock, and encirclement. Wars, they believed, were won by destroying enemy armies, not by occupying land. Across the border stood the Red Army. On paper, it was enormous. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft. But appearances were deceptive. Joseph Stalin's purges had decimated the officer corps. Experienced commanders had been executed or imprisoned. Those who remained were afraid to act without orders. Units were poorly coordinated. Communications were weak, and morale was fragile. Yet there was one factor the Germans underestimated completely: the Soviet Union's ability to absorb punishment. At 3:15 a.m., June 22, 1941, the silence was shattered. German artillery opened fire along the entire front. Moments later, the Luftwaffe crossed the border. Within hours, Soviet airfields were burning. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground, lined up neatly, unable to take off. Entire Soviet divisions were caught in their barracks, overwhelmed before they could organize. German tanks surged forward, bypassing resistance and driving deep into Soviet territory. The goal was not to fight enemy units head-on. It was to surround them. And it worked. Near Białystok and Minsk, German armored spearheads closed massive pincers. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped. Some fought desperately. Others surrendered in shock. Columns of prisoners stretched for miles. To the world, it looked like another German masterpiece. A repeat of France, only larger. Within weeks, German forces had advanced hundreds of miles. Entire Soviet armies had vanished. Hitler was ecstatic. He declared that the Red Army had already been broken. But behind the triumph lay uncomfortable truths. German supply lines were overstretched. Fuel and ammunition lagged behind the advancing tanks. The distances were far greater than expected. And despite catastrophic losses, the Soviet Union did not collapse. More soldiers kept coming. More factories kept producing. More resistance formed behind the front lines. The lightning strike had landed, but the storm was far from over. By July 1941, German commanders believed they were on the edge of total victory. Entire Soviet armies had been destroyed. Millions of prisoners were marching westward. Maps were redrawn almost daily to reflect the speed of the advance. But something was wrong. The German army was winning, yet the war refused to end. Every mile east stretched supply lines thinner. Trucks broke down on primitive roads. Railways had to be rebuilt to German gauge. Fuel, food, and ammunition fell dangerously behind the front. German soldiers began to march when vehicles failed. Horses replaced trucks. Speed, the very heart of Blitzkrieg, slowed. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union adapted. Factories were dismantled and moved east beyond the Ural Mountains. New divisions were raised at astonishing speed. Commanders learned painfully, but quickly. Each encirclement destroyed an army, but another took its place. Hitler's fatal intervention. At the center of the German advance stood Army Group Center, poised for a final drive on Moscow. The road to the Soviet capital lay open. Many generals urged immediate action. Moscow was the heart of Soviet communications, industry, and morale. Its fall, they argued, could end the war. Hitler disagreed. Obsessed with resources, he diverted armored units south toward Ukraine and north toward Leningrad. Kiev, he insisted, must fall first. The decision shattered momentum. Weeks were lost in brutal fighting. Autumn rains turned roads into seas of mud. Engines stalled. Men collapsed from exhaustion. When the push toward Moscow finally resumed, summer was gone. As German troops advanced once more, resistance hardened. Soviet soldiers fought with growing determination. Civilians dug trenches outside Moscow. Entire cities were mobilized for defense. Behind the lines, partisan warfare exploded. Railways were sabotaged. Supply convoys vanished. The German army was no longer racing forward. It was grinding. And winter was coming. The illusion shatters. By October, the truth became impossible to ignore. Germany had not planned for a long war. It had not prepared for winter. And it had underestimated both the Soviet state and its people. Operation Barbarossa had been built on one assumption: that the Soviet Union would collapse quickly. It did not. And with every passing day, Germany sank deeper into a war it could not afford, against an enemy that refused to die. When winter took command. In October 1941, the German army launched Operation Typhoon, the final push toward Moscow. At first, success seemed within reach. German forces encircled Soviet units at Vyazma and Bryansk, capturing hundreds of thousands more prisoners. The road to Moscow appeared open once again, but the weather had other plans. Autumn rains turned dirt roads into thick mud. Vehicles sank to their axles. Supply convoys stalled. Men dragged artillery by hand. Then, without warning, the temperature collapsed. Engines froze solid. Lubricants turned to sludge. Weapons jammed. German soldiers lacked winter clothing. Many wrapped themselves in newspapers or scavenged Soviet gear from the dead. Frostbite claimed thousands before bullets did. The Soviets strike back. While the German army froze, the Red Army prepared. Stalin, finally convinced Moscow would be attacked, released his last reserves. Fresh divisions arrived from Siberia, hardened troops trained for winter warfare. Intelligence had confirmed that Japan would not attack in the east. On December 5, 1941, the Soviets counterattacked. German lines cracked. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht was driven backward on a massive scale. Entire units retreated in chaos. Positions were abandoned. Command structures broke down. Hitler responded with fury. He forbade retreat. Commanders who disobeyed were dismissed. Some were arrested, but discipline could not overcome reality. The German advance had reached its limit. The moment everything changed. By January 1942, Operation Barbarossa was over. The Soviet Union still stood. Moscow remained unconquered. Germany had suffered catastrophic losses. More importantly, the nature of the war had changed forever. Germany was now locked in a war of attrition it could not win. Every loss on the Eastern Front was irreplaceable. Every Soviet loss could be replaced and multiplied. Barbarossa had failed. And with that failure, Germany's fate was sealed. Legacy of a gamble. Operation Barbarossa was the largest invasion in human history. It was also one of the greatest strategic failures ever committed. Driven by ideology, arrogance, and contempt for the enemy, Hitler had opened a front that consumed the Third Reich. From this point forward, Germany would fight defensively. Its victories would shrink. Its defeats would grow. The road to Berlin did not begin in defeat, but in overconfidence. Closing reflection. Operation Barbarossa was meant to destroy the Soviet Union in weeks. Instead, it awakened a force that would march all the way to Berlin. And when the war finally ended, the ruins of Nazi Germany stood as silent proof of a single truth. Some invasions are so ambitious that failure becomes inevitable.